I'm an Android developer with BottleRocket Studios. We make apps for Android and iOS, and we've started doing web pages. And I've personally led development on the Starwood Hotels app, which sadly is now the Marriott app. No offense to Marriott, just my app is gone now. A major U.S. airline. Now I've been working on a business-to-business app for animal supply company that we just launched. And our teams on these apps have about 15 to 30 people. That'll include 4 to 8 Android developers and then about the same number of iOS developers. QA, project managers, user experience designers, client liaisons, sometimes other roles. And one thing that I discovered when I started being the lead developer on a project is that there are just a ton of resources out there for things that are kind of like leading a team of developers, but not a lot out there that tells you how to do exactly the job that I found myself doing. And, I had role models, but in a lot of cases, they were just, the smartest person on the project or the most experienced person on the project, and didn't aspire to be much more, at least that I could see. Certainly never counseled me on what they were doing intentionally to help develop the people on the team, to help the team move forward. Mostly my experience of being a team member was just being told, now you're going to work on this. And then I would work on that until it was done, and then I would be told what the next thing I was going to work on. So through trial and error, I've put together my own perspective, and I'm pretty pleased with the results that I've achieved. So that's what I'm hoping to share. On every project that I've worked on, I've started just through fortune with a group of relatively inexperienced developers in the organization. Most of them had started within the past year, which, the average tenure of our developers is only a few years, but their first job was at BottleRocket. And then within a year, my manager would be coming to me telling me, so you're hoarding all the good talent and we need to take some people out to share them with other projects. And they were the same people that started on the project. It's just the experience of getting to work on a project the way I was leading it was helping people grow so much that I was consistently turning people back out to the organization to be leaders on other projects. And that's certainly a reflection of external factors too. Like we've had some bad projects and we've had some great projects, and I've been fortunate that the projects that I've been on have all been great. And I can't claim that it's just me making them great. But there are definitely some things that I feel like you can always control to help build a successful team. But I do have some minimum qualifications for team members, and they're baked into the title of the presentation. I mean them as very minimal standards. I don't mean that team members need to be outgoing. They don't need to be personable. They don't need to be the sort of people who go out with each other after work, but they need to be not unfriendly. They need to understand kindness and empathy, and I think that is necessary. I don't think that someone can be a functional member of a team that helps other people on the team grow if they don't understand that the other people on the team have feelings and those feelings are important. They have to understand, and this is really important, that even when they disagree with someone on the team, that they're still working towards a common goal. And the reason they're having the disagreement is because they're both passionate about meeting the goals of the project, not because the other person's an idiot and they just need to prove that they are the smartest person in the room. The same thing for competent. I really just mean not incompetent. I mean someone who's getting better, someone who isn't making the same mistake over and over again. When they're presented with an environment where they can be successful, that they're able to do the things that are part of their job, that they're able to take on a story in Jira, complete that story, check it into the repo, accept criticism for things that they've done that could be done better, we have some discussions, especially with hiring decisions, about whether someone is better than an empty desk. And we don't mean that literally, that an empty desk would actually accomplish more than they would, just that after you account for all the time that it takes to set someone up for success, and then let them do their work as much as they can independently, the time that you spent setting them up, you could have accomplished everything that they're going to accomplish before they come back for more direction. And sometimes that is how people come into the organization, and that's great because you set them up, they learn, and then they never need your help with that task again. So you have to account for the fact that an empty desk is never going to get better. But you also have to account for the fact that an empty desk is never going to pick a fight with a coworker, and you have to account for the fact that an empty desk is never going to write a bug that's going to manage to make it into production. So when I say better than an empty desk, that really is a decision that we make. It really is something where sometimes you have to consider, is this person actually a net benefit to the project? And most of the time when I find that someone isn't being a net benefit to the project, it's either because they're not learning and getting better, or it's because they're so difficult to work with that they're making other people on the team less effective. So when I say that we need competent, friendly people, that's like the bottom of our hierarchy of needs. It's our foundation. Before we get anything else, we need a group of people who can feel invested in each other's success and are minimally capable of achieving success independently. So every person, when they're working on their own, can accomplish something, and they're happy when other people on the team accomplish something too. I really hope that that's a small standard, but I've definitely worked with some people who have managed to not meet it. So that's why I feel it's important to start out with this foundation. And sometimes you'll end up in a situation where you just have one person who you're stuck with and they don't meet one of these qualifications. And there's something you can do about that. You have to be aware that that's the biggest problem your team is facing, that everybody on the team is going to feel the effects of this person who's either doing things that they're having to make up for or just actively getting on their nerves. And so the best thing to do is to picture yourself as, a white blood cell surrounding them with kindness and trying to push them to the edge where nobody but you has to interact with them. They're not getting feedback from anybody else. Nobody's blowing up at them. All they're getting is your undivided attention, and it's going to slow you down, but at least you're the person, hopefully, best equipped to deal with it. If you have multiple members who are either incompetent or unfriendly, I hope you have really good luck with that, and I would be delighted to attend your talk on how you made this work. And I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm not saying that a team like that can't accomplish something, but when people on a team care about each other, when people on the team learn and get better, then you're going to see multiplicative efforts. You're going to see people making each other better. If you don't have that environment, if you have multiple people that are a problem everyone has to work together to solve, that's the only problem they're going to be solving. Okay, so let's assume that we do have a team that meets my requirements. We have competent, friendly people. What can we give them to help them improve? Last year, I saw this huge thread on Twitter that really solidified my thinking on this. It's really nice when you come across someone who tells you that everything you think is right, but also wraps it up in a tidy acronym. So our tidy acronym here is RAMPS. Rhythm, autonomy, mastery, purpose, and safety. So these are all things that we're working to provide people with, to tell people that they're entitled to, and to give the overall team as a whole as well. And none of these are binary toggles, they're all sliders. We can improve each of these. We can say that we're doing really well at some of them, we're doing okay at some of them, but they're all important. They're all going to help the team function better They're all going to move us towards a place where we're improving each other. And to spoil the Twitter thread, the answer is, why does your team need a sense of urgency? So he doesn't ever actually say this is how to give a team a sense of urgency, but rather questions where that question even comes from. And I'll talk about that some too. And this isn't a solution in itself. This is just a vocabulary, both for me to talk about what I think is important, but also it's a great vocabulary to take back to a team and say, these are things that you should be expecting. Let me know if you're not getting these things. And everyone on the team should expect that if they say, I don't feel like I'm getting this, that it's going to be handled in a way that makes them feel like they did the right thing to say that. So let's talk about each of these facets. First off is rhythm. So I pinky swear, I have been in a meeting where someone lashed out at the other people in the meeting for expecting a 40-hour work week. They said that our industry, the minimum expectation is 55 hours a week, and it only goes up from there. That if you think that you can do the work of a software developer and you're not working 55 hours a week, you're just entirely deluded. And the expectation at BottleRocket is 40 hours a week. If we believe that more is necessary for the health of the project, we set a duration and we have a discussion to get buy-in from the team. We treat it as an exception. We treat it as an exceptional request because it's crap. You will find, if you ask people, can you function well working much more than 40 hours a week? About 30% of the people you ask are going to tell you, yes, absolutely. I can keep functioning at exactly the same level for 60 hours, 70 hours. And then if you actually test that, you'll find that about 25% of them were wrong. Almost everyone does degrade as they work longer and longer hours. There are people out there who the only thing that they find entertaining is writing more code. And if you send them home and say, you're not allowed to commit to the repo between this hour and this hour, they're just gonna work on one of their side projects. Or if they're Jake Wharton, they're just gonna spin off another open source repo. These people do exist, but way more people think that they are this person than actually are. And if you set the expectation that the only way to be a good functioning member of your team is to be one of these people, you're going to get a lot of people who will commit to it, and you will drive them to work longer hours than they're capable of working, and you'll push them to a point where you're getting diminishing returns. And if you had just started at the beginning and said, no one works more than 40 hours a week, the overall productivity of the entire team would have been better. You will accomplish more in those 40 hours than you would with the 60 hours that everyone ends up committing to, if you let them. And that's partly a function of the type of work that we do. There are definitely other jobs where you can function more longer, but we're expecting people to be able to make good decisions all the time. And the bad decision that you make after 55 hours is going to do just as much damage and take just as much time to recover from as the one that you make first thing in the morning. So rhythm is the idea that we need to offer periods of high activity and balance them with periods of rest. So we can't always be in crunch time, but we also can't always be in downtime. I have been in that situation where I'm just 75% busy forever, and it's awful. Because what you end up learning to do is fill your hours with that 75%. You make the 75% take 100% of your time, and you build tools and techniques to feel like that is a normal thing to do. And it's really hard to get out of when that enforced 75% ends. So you do need to go back and forth between let's have a period of high intensity, let's have a period of low intensity. I think pretty much everyone has agreed that the idea of let us sprint for 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, forever, is not the best thing to do. Next up, we have autonomy. So this is the idea that we let people decide what to do. We let them decide how to do it. It's unfortunate that it starts with a vowel, because that means we have to put it in the middle of whatever our acronym is, and I would really like this to be at the beginning or the end to highlight how important it is and how valuable it is. Because everyone that I've ever worked with, even the incompetent, unfriendly people, has benefited from being given more autonomy than less. It's always better to err on the side of giving someone a little bit more trust than they've earned. But we also have to understand that the goal isn't complete autonomy, because we are working together on a team. We have to find ways to give people autonomy without damaging the project, and open up those ways as wide as we can, but then set boundaries to keep people on the same page, keep the code base looking recognizable, and then recognize that wherever we put that boundary, eventually somebody's going to get stuck on it. A minute ago, both of these cows had the same amount of autonomy, and now one of them is super happy, and the other one is a cow and ends up looking pretty happy no matter what it does, but I'm sure it would rather be moving. I know from experience that when you put a developer in that position, they hate it. When you tell them, we don't cross this line, and that line is super important to them, then that's the only thing that matters. And they can't see how much field is behind that line. All they can see is, I want to set up my fragments this way. Project standard is fragments get set up this way, and nothing else is important to them. The best way to handle this is to approach it proactively, set the expectations that we have all thought out the boundaries and agreed on them, and that we're not going to reinvestigate them every time we create a new activity, every time we open up a new API. You know, we can have one discussion about why we don't use the navigation architecture component, or why we do, but we don't fight that fight every time something goes wrong. And having, you know, it needs to be communicated to everyone, especially if they start to get in this situation, that the benefits of having a code base that everyone can understand and work together on outweigh this particular expression of autonomy. What we want to focus on is giving a developer the freedom to decide what they're working on, how they're doing that work, and how they can make the code they're working with better. If you give them the freedom to decide that maybe making a new recycler view framework would make things better, and let them explore it, or let them have the freedom to decide that we really need to get this release out the door, and they'll just do the most expedient thing. Or give them the freedom to try that pattern that you told them over and over again is a terrible idea, and change your mind about it. Like, if they feel like they're controlling what they're doing moment to moment, it's going to give them a chance to do the things that are important to them and feel invested in everything that they're doing. It also shows them that you trust them and value the contributions. And then one day when you actually do trust them, it's going to start saving you time and mental energy. And that's what I mean about giving people more autonomy than they've earned. You should always be nervous. You should always, like when I onboard people to a project, the first thing that I do after, telling them what the project is and what it's about, is I just give them a list of stuff that needs worked on and let them pick something that they feel comfortable working on. And most of the time they go straight to something that makes me gasp and be like, why don't we move down the list? And I don't do that. It's really important that I don't do that. I fight down the urge to say, are you sure you can handle that? I fight down the urge to say, okay, let's open up this file and go to this line and let me show you exactly what you need to do. What I do is I start figuring out how I'm going to detect whether what they're doing is working, whether they're doing a good job. And most of the time, what I've found is they have earned that trust. They have seen that I've given them something, given them this amount of trust, and they have done the work to earn it. They'll go out of their way. Occasionally, they'll work way more hours than they should to try and prove to me that they don't need my supervision, they don't need hand-holding, and they've turned in something where I was just as happy with what they did as what I would have done. And if they don't, I know that I need to be there to look at it and give them suggestions. All right, so we're halfway through and we're on mastery. So this is the idea that everyone has in mind a better version of themselves, and they can see the connection between what they're doing and approaching that better version of themselves. This is a powerful motivator. When you're in that magical place where everyone on your team sees that what they're doing is making them better at their own job, making them a more efficient, better developer, and they see that, I lost my place in the sentence there. They're excited about being a better developer, and they see that working on the project is making them a better developer. That's when you start telling people, okay, it's time to go home. It's 6 o'clock. You got here before I did. Let's shut down. It'll still be there in the morning. That's when people start going above and beyond just because they're excited about what being on the project is doing for them. And I hope you can see how these facets start to build on each other. When you give people rhythm, when you give them periods of downtime where they can do what's important to them, when you give them autonomy to decide what they should be working on, then a lot of people are just going to naturally start making themselves better at the things that are important to them. I had one developer, when we had some downtime, started working on integration tests and learned that he could set up an integration test with a mocked API where he could just click run on the integration test and then just have the integration test sleep. And now it takes him directly to the screen that he's working on with the data that he needs and shows it in exactly the state that he wants running on device. And now that's the way everybody on that team is working. When they start working on making UI changes to a screen, the very first thing they do is set it up so that they click one button. And now, after Gradle build running, installing APK, now they're looking at the exact screen that they need to go to, which is really 5 screens deep in a checkout flow. And they didn't have to do any of that flow because it just loads the screen with exactly the information they need. That's something that I would never have thought to ask anyone on the team to do. But it was something that he felt passionately about, and it benefited everybody on the team. So then there's purpose, and this is what people outside of the team think motivation is. This is the idea that everyone is working together toward a common goal. And it's important. Like, we need to feel like what we are doing matters. It's easy to feel like what we're doing matters when we're working on something that's actually going to help someone in the real world do something that we think is a good thing to do. Booking a hotel is not inherently unethical. It's nice to think that I'm going to make the experience of booking a hotel better. But even if we're just helping someone pay a bill that they don't want to pay, or even if we're working on a screen that the client says we need, even though we're really convinced that no actual user is ever going to see it, we can still make the experience better for the user that we hold in our heads that will someday get to see it. If nothing else, we can focus on the fact that we are part of a team, and when we do a good job, everybody gets to go home and everybody gets to be satisfied and hopefully move on to something that's more uplifting. But a lot of what we do, we do get to take a good amount of joy in feeling like what we are doing is going to make somebody's life easier at some point. This is also why I say that empathy and kindness are a prerequisite, because if everybody on the team is motivated by making the lives of the people on the team and the eventual users better, then this basically comes for free. It's easy to ensure that they're going to be motivated toward beneficial behaviors. If somebody's purpose is to demonstrate that somebody else on the team is wrong and that that person is smarter than everybody else, that is not a good purpose for them to have. I'm sorry. Please don't have that purpose. I don't know that you can change their purpose, but it's definitely going to be harmful if they fulfill their purpose. And if you help other people fulfill their purpose of feeling like they belong to a team that is doing good work together, then it's going to lessen that person's fulfillment. So it also seems like every organization has at least one person that's convinced that purpose is the entirety of motivation and satisfaction. And if everyone on the team would just understand how important the work they're doing is, they'd stop screwing up or wasting time or whatever they think that the members of the team are doing that's detracting from the success of the team. And I can almost guarantee that when that happens, it's not because of a disconnect between the person who's doing something wrong and the end goal. I know for my part, when it happened to me, it was because the message that I had received from management, which wasn't the message management had intended to send, was that it was just as bad for a project to be early as it was to be late. Because if a project was early, that meant that we hadn't taken on enough work and we had done a bad job of estimating. And we had robbed the company of money that it should have earned by delivering more features. And so, that's how I ended up in that 75% zone where there was no reason for me to work harder because it would just make things worse on my team. But management was communicating very clearly, this is how the work you're doing connects to the bottom line. This is how it connects to your paycheck. Even this is how it connects to our users. What was getting lost wasn't the end goal, the sense of purpose. What was getting lost was, how does what I'm doing connect to that sense of purpose? And then we have safety, and this is really hard. It's difficult to evaluate. It's difficult to earn. It's really hard to investigate how safe someone feels. Asking someone, do you feel like you'll be treated differently if you behave or believe differently from your peers? That doesn't make them feel safe. That makes them feel like, well, maybe they should be worried that they will be treated differently. Demanding, you need to tell me if you feel unsafe, is exactly the opposite of what we're hoping for. But how do we know? You have to be very delicate about it. You have to very subtly investigate how people on your team feel. Now, there's two big things that we're talking about when we talk about safety. One is safety in things that don't impact the team. It's okay to have terrible misconceptions, beliefs that are demonstrably wrong. That's fine. There are some beliefs that are harmful to the planet. We're not talking about, whether we should engage in ethical discussions with our coworkers. We're just talking about, is it okay to hold beliefs, and are you going to be challenging people on whether their beliefs are okay ones to hold? It's difficult to give people that sense of safety with this, but you need to let people know that even if you disagree with what they think, that you're still going to respect them as people and you're still going to respect them on other topics. Because if they feel like they've lost your respect because they thought something stupid about something that doesn't matter, they're also not going to be telling you good suggestions they have for the project. But then they also have to feel safe when they make those suggestions. They need to feel safe to experiment and try things and do things in a way that everyone knows won't work. And again, there's a balance. You don't want them always trying the same thing over and over again, always importing this framework that you don't want in the project. Eventually you have to agree, even though we hold this disagreement, we respect all viewpoints, please stop importing RxJava, or please leave RxJava in the project, whichever way. But also people need to feel safe to just screw up, because everyone is going to screw up. Everyone at some point is going to face a situation, and they're going to look at all the information they have available, they're going to make the best decision they possibly can, and everything's going to go to hell. And everyone needs to know that when that happens, the best thing for everyone is going to be if the person who just made everything awful raises their hand and says, everything just became awful. Please help me. Let's fix this. The alternative is, the Charlie Chaplin-esque afternoon of trying to cover up their mistake. And that's only going to make things worse. And I say that from experience. Every time I have accidentally messed up remote and tried to do a forced push, I have made things much, much worse. But, I was just trying to get it fixed before anybody noticed. And that's just my personal screw up that always happens. So you can feel free to feel better than me because of that. But you also need to understand that if you make me feel like I'm a bad person because that happens to me, then the next time it happens, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and hide it. And when I try and hide it, I'm going to make things worse. So that's what I mean when I talk about safety. So what I try to do is provide a very broad safety net and place it very far away. I want everyone to know that they can rely on it, that the whole team is going to help them if something goes wrong. And the lead's always going to be one of the biggest pillars supporting that safety net. But the rest of the team helps too. My teams have always been small enough that we all sit together, and when something goes wrong, we all just turn our chairs around and talk about it. And sometimes somebody else has faced exactly the same problem, and so they just sit together and fix it straight away. Sometimes, you just have to talk through it, and all of a sudden you realize what went wrong. And sometimes we don't even get to the safety net. Sometimes something else gets triggered. So this is what I consider the components of my safety net. And I've got them kind of ordered from the things that have the effect of making it easier to do the right thing down to the things that help us detect when someone did the wrong thing. Having good examples, not having bad examples, those make it really easy to write good code. Having code reviews kind of falls in both categories because, I've definitely seen mistakes caught in pull requests, but also I have caught mistakes myself when I've thought, oh, if I push this, somebody's going to say something. And if I knew nobody was going to look at it, I would have just pushed it. But because I knew someone was going to see it and say something, I was like, okay, I'm going to fix this before I push it. So here's another anecdote. I was trying to do something really helpful on my current project. And I tried to put together one really good activity that was an example of how we should do everything that, laid out how we're doing MVVM on this project. And I put together an activity, it was working, and I was happy with it. And then I was like, oh, there's this other activity that does something different, so I should make sure it works for that. So I created this other activity, and I got it set up so that it was working right, and I made some changes, and now I'm happier, and then I'm like, oh, one more. And then I work on this other activity, and so now activity number 3 is exactly the way I want it. And activity 2 is almost how I want it, and activity 1 is almost how I want it. Obviously, the part where I made the big mistake was I never went back to touch the other 2. And so now we have, say, 20 activities. 9 of them do things the right way. 7 of them do things almost the right way. 4 of them do things almost the right way. So, oops. But the good news is now we have some tech debt that we can address. And that'll be something great that I can use to onboard someone on the project. I'm going to talk once again about boundaries. So when I say that an activity is doing something the right way, I really do mean the right way. We really want to say, this is the way we do things on this project. We at Bottle Rocket went through as a group, just the Android development team, and identified all the different frameworks that we use to solve common problems. And when we just look at stuff we use to get stuff from the network and put it somewhere, we're looking at 6 different axes of choice, and some of them have more than 5 options. So, we could do 1,000 projects and do every single one of them differently, even if we do things consistently within one project. Even if we're disciplined enough to only have one thing in a project, if you open yourself up to the chance that You're going to do some things the way this person likes them, some things the way this person likes them. It's going to be very difficult for people to move through the code. And that's, again, that's directly in opposition to giving people autonomy. So it is something where you have to bring people into those decisions. You have to involve them and make them feel like those decisions belong to them as well. But at some point, you do have to say, this is how things work on this project. Let's talk about one more time when I totally messed up. So someone on my team did something dumb. They saw that there was a senior class of customer, and so they created enum for senior, adult, and minor. And that was wrong because the client doesn't care about minors in terms of people who are under 18. That's fine. Like, it was a natural mistake to make, but it was also like really poorly considered to pull in this implicit requirement without having any justification from the client's needs. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody on the team was understood the problems that could have caused, and like saw how that could flow through to something getting released to production without it ever getting caught. And I thought that I had done a really good job of setting the expectation that when I criticized something that someone did, I was criticizing the action, I wasn't criticizing the person, and that all I'm doing is helping people not make mistakes in the future, and that I understand that we're all going to make mistakes. It's the price we pay for moving fast. And actually, the person that made the mistake had explicitly said, go ahead, criticism doesn't bother me. So I grabbed everyone and I headed into a conference room so we could all talk about it and say why it was a mistake and, explain this is how this could have gotten into prod. And about 5 minutes into the discussion, I realized that the person who had made the mistake wasn't making eye contact with anyone anymore. And then we broke up, and later he was sitting by himself in the break room, and I went over to apologize, but it was very clear that an apology wasn't helping, that I had permanently damaged his feeling of safety on the project. I definitely did not provide him the level of safety that he actually needed. And I didn't handle that situation in a way that made him feel like it would be fine if he did something dumb in the future. And I didn't know that because he had done, there's doing a poor job of communicating your needs, and then this was worse than that because he had explicitly communicated that his needs were totally different than what they actually were. And that, that's unfortunate, but I could have taken a very easy step before I did it that would have totally prevented it. If I had just asked him personally, is it okay if I talk about this with the rest of the team? I'd like to imagine that it would have prevented this problem. So, I made a mistake, and that has to be fine because I had all the information available to me that I could get. I thought I was doing the best thing for everyone on the team, and I just made the wrong decision. And that's why friendliness and kindness and empathy are so important, because the people on my team also need to be able to forgive me when I make a mistake. Everyone needs to understand, this is really important, that nobody came to work intending to do a bad job. Everyone needs to understand that whatever went wrong, with the information they had, they thought they were doing something that was going to help. And that's easier to believe when everybody actually wants to be kind and helpful. And then, just to go back to this idea of urgency, we have had experiences where we've had to try to look busy because someone external to the team had the expectation that we should look busy. I've been on a crit sit, which if you haven't had the pleasure, is when everybody who cares that a problem gets solved and everybody involved in solving the problem sits on a conference call until the problem is solved. It's not the best way to do development, I must say. But it did make sure that everybody that we needed to be able to talk to was instantly available for us to talk to. So me and the other developer and the back-end guy who was on the phone the 3 minutes that we spent talking to each other, that was very valuable. Probably could have been handled on Slack, but we definitely convinced everyone that everyone who should be trying to solve the problem was 100% dedicated to solving the problem and not accomplishing anything else. I can't say that this was I can't say that we didn't solve the problem better because we were doing this, but I do know that you can't sustain that. You can't sustain that. We must appear 100% focused for days or weeks. You have to respect that giving people an environment where they can flourish is going to be more effective in the long run than making people look and feel driven all the time. So, if I can choose between allowing people to actually be productive and demonstrating to people who walk by that we're behaving productively, I'm always going to err on, not looking productive, but actually giving people an environment where they can flourish and do their best work. One other thing that I didn't find a way to make a slide for, but just one thing that I have found super helpful when dealing with junior engineers that I feel like I need to say is asking them for help makes them feel amazing and helps them grow so much. And it's something that we have there, at least in the culture that I grew up in. The more senior you were, the less you needed to ask for help. And it would even show up on, it was an element on the review. Do they need to ask other people for help, or how much do they bother people senior to them? So there's this baked in idea that the only person you can ever get help from is someone senior to you, and if you do it, you're doing something wrong. And that's terrible. When you as a project lead have a problem and you don't know how to solve it, try to make your first response to be to ask someone junior to you if they have any ideas. Because a lot of times they'll surprise you, but they will always be surprised themselves. And that's all I've got. The things that I've learned a lot from, I have a bit.ly link. The CDK-ramps is a link to the Twitter thread talking about ramps. And then the Field Guide to Understanding Human Error talks a lot about how errors happen, and it's more oriented towards errors that kill people, but it's a really good framework. And it's like when I say no one comes to work intending to do a bad job, that comes directly from that. And when I talk about making the best decision we can with the information available to us, that comes from that. It's a great book to just have a perspective on how things go wrong, and how most of the time when things go wrong, it's not because someone did something that they knew was stupid at the time. And then the presentation itself is that last link. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
How well do you know people in your team? Do you know what they're interested in?
The question was, how well do I know the people on my team? And I try to be sensitive to the fact that some people don't want to be known very well. And so I do my best to let them lead that to some degree. I'm very close friends with some of the people on my team. And some of the people on my team, at least to me, seem to be the kind of people who just want to show up, work, go home. Do I find it important to know people in this way? Absolutely, I do. I always want to know more about the people on my team. I just don't want to make them uncomfortable. And so I, again, try to let them lead that, but I do try to, it's really important to communicate to the people on your team that you are invested in them as people. That really helps with delivering news that they have done something that they shouldn't. Yeah, so the question was, how do I detect the qualities that I need in the people that I hire? The kindness is often easier than you would think. We have had a few people who have come through for interviews where by the end of the interview, everyone who talked to them was convinced that they were competent, and everyone who interviewed them did not want them on their team. Most of the time that was because they were very arrogant. We did have one person who I was really impressed. Like, one thing that I do, and this may be awful in interviews, is I am not particularly friendly. I try to stress people out, and I try and do it in a very awkward way. One thing that really provides a lot of insight into people is to ask them a question where the answer should be obvious. We have this culture where we don't do that, where one thing that's really great is when someone presents a solution to a problem, you say, is that the most efficient way? And it is. And they feel like it should be obvious that it is. And some people will get really upset. And some people will really take that in stride. And so that's one thing that I find does a really good job of letting you see that person's personality. As far as competence, it's hard, right? Because a lot of times, even with people who are more senior, we're worried that they got to that level and that's the level they're going to be at. So, we have a 90-day probation period that helps. But mostly we've just been very fortunate. That said, part of the reason that I consider it a prerequisite is because we have had failures on that part. And it's really important to be prepared to deal with it when it happens. One person in particular, I just don't think he was capable of learning beyond a certain point. But he got kicked from project to project, and everyone would just give him the tiniest slices of work that they could and move him on. And nobody worked to identify, is this person actually getting better? They were just trying to contain it without actually, trying to either elevate him or separate ourselves from him. So a lot of times that has to be done kind of retrospectively. Any other questions? Yeah. That is also very hard. So the question was, how do I divide my time between mentorship and leadership responsibilities and actually doing development? And I'm sad to say that a lot of the time, the way I do that is I provide mentorship and leadership from 9 to 5, and then whatever development I need to do, I do after 5 o'clock. That's horrible. I should do a better job of it. But it's not always the case. It just happens that sometimes I'm in a situation where between what the client needs and what the people on my team need, there's just not more time. And I would rather the crunch be felt by me than the other people on my team. But I also, I'll do 45 hours every week, but I won't do 50 hours any week. So I try to keep it balanced. But the other members on the team have to come first because they're the ones that are going to support me in the future. So the question is if these beliefs feed back into the evaluation system. And there's nothing formalized about it. It would be nice to broaden the use of this vocabulary within the organization and use it more as part of how we look at team health. The unfortunate thing is that, as is often the case, I am not a huge part of the HR review process at my organization for the people that are on my team, because they have HR managers. And so, my feedback is part of what they consider, but it's a trade-off. You can be part of being their HR manager all the time, and then you get to be part of the review process, or you can focus on the project health, and then you're not as, because you do need, the person who's doing the review needs to also be part of giving them feedback throughout. So that's the way we've set the balance, and I think that's the way a lot of places do set the balance. But it does mean that mostly the way I have an impact on someone's performance review is by giving them a gold star for being on a project that was really successful.